any non-material existence. Okay, atheists deny both these things. But Astika Hindu philosophers, they may or may not posit God. They may or may not assume that God exists. But all of them do posit consciousness. They all assume that consciousness of some sort exists. Consciousness is not the same as God, or even the same as the Christian concept of soul. Therefore, neither the word theist nor the word atheist has an exact equivalent in Sanskrit. Why? Because Hindu thought operates on different premises from Christianity. In Christianity, believing, and all the Abrahamic religions actually, believing in one God is essential. In Hinduism, it is not essential. I want to sort of emphasize this. In Hinduism, it is not essential to believe in one God. You may, but you may not. So consciousness is a principle that is a non-material principle. You do believe in that, but not in God necessarily. So the primary difference, to sum up, between an atheist and a Nastika is that an atheist, in the context of a monotheistic religion, such as Christianity or Islam, is one who denies the existence of God. All right, an atheist denies the existence of God. And the existence of God is the foundational premise of these religions. If you don't believe in God, then you don't believe in these religions. An atheist also denies the soul and an afterlife, and that follows from the basic denial of God. The most important thing is to believe in God. After that comes soul and afterlife. So an atheist denies those two. On the other hand, a Nastika is one who does not accept the Vedas, from which may follow a denial of the existence of gods or goddesses, or it may not follow. You may deny self or consciousness, as the Charvaka did, but you may not. However, a Buddhist, whom some Hindus termed as Nastika, believes in rebirth. Therefore, Buddhists did not call themselves Nastika. Hindu Mimamsa philosophers also say that there's no need for a god, but nevertheless, they are Astika, not Nastika. So now, having established all this, which I hope is clear, the question is, what is the process by which the words Astika and Nastika in Sanskrit, or Astik and Nastik in modern Indian languages, how do they come to mean theist and atheist, when clearly that is not what they mean? Affirmer and denier would be better translations. I studied dictionaries, and I found that dictionaries are crucial to the process of changing the meanings of words and concepts. The first Sanskrit-English dictionary ever published is H. Wilson. He published it in 1832. This dictionary defines Nastika, the word Nastika, so it's Sanskrit to English dictionary. He defines Nastika thus: an atheist, comma, but applied by the Orthodox Hindus to anyone who denies the divine authority of the Vedas or doubts the legends of the Puranas. Now let's closely look at the way the meaning is slipping here, slippage of meaning. First, Wilson states the meaning of Nastika is atheist. Then he modifies this, but applied by the Orthodox Hindus. Notice the word but, which is doing a lot of work. The word means atheist, but it is applied by the Orthodox Hindus to anyone who denies the divine authority of the Vedas or doubts the legends of the Puranas. Now, those two things are not the same at all. You may deny the Vedas or the Puran, but you may not be an atheist. So that doesn't work. Then, okay, now by his definition, the Orthodox Hindus apply it to this, but for unorthodox Hindus, Nastika must mean atheist. But Orthodox Hindus have twisted it to apply to disbelievers in Puranas or Vedas. Now, he doesn't give any evidence for all these assertions, but he's put it in the dictionary. 14 years later, Yeats published a Sanskrit-English dictionary. Again, it is still Sanskrit to English in 1846. And now on the title page, he expressly says that this dictionary is designed for Indian schools and colleges, okay? He picks up Wilson's definition without the modification, and he simply states Nastika and atheist. So here's the process of translation, which is complete, with the original meaning of the word completely erased. Now, there is a process of reverse translation that is sort of implicit in Wilson, but it becomes explicit in Monia Williams, very influential dictionaries. And I'll just talk about this. This is first, he has an 1851 dictionary, which is English to Sanskrit. Now, this is reverse translation, English to Sanskrit. And for the first two dictionaries I mentioned were Sanskrit to English. Now, reverse translation from English to Sanskrit, Monier Williams translates the English word atheist into Sanskrit as Nastika, Devanindakaha, and Ishvaravadi. Okay, all the three words. Now, please note three very different Sanskrit words are all used as translations of atheist. Nastika, which I have talked about, Devanindakaha, one who denies or criticizes the devas, the gods, Anishvaravadi, one who does not believe in God. Nastika is placed first, even though Nastika is the one least similar to the word atheist. If you said Anishvaravadi, better translation than Nastika. 20 years later, in his 1872 Sanskrit English dictionary, Monier Williams again performs this reverse translation. He repeats and expands Wilson's statement. I quote here, this is Monier Williams. Nastika, atheistical, unbelieving, infidel, an unbeliever, applied by the Orthodox Hindus to anyone who denies the divine authority of the Vedas and a future life or doubts the legends of the Puranas. Nastikata, Nastikatva, Nastikya. Infidelity, disbelief, atheism, denial of the deity or a future state of the authority of the Vedas, etc. Buddhism, heresy, etc. Heresy. Nastika Mata, an atheistical opinion. Notice the whole bunch of words piled together here. Infidelity. The concept of infidel is not a Hindu concept. And he adds here disbelief in a future state and a future life, okay, which was part of the ancient Hindu philosopher's definition of Nastika. But he now adds the words infidel, which literally means unfaithful, and heresy, which are Christian theological terms. They have no equivalence at all in Sanskrit. At this time, some scholars and dictionaries also translate the Sanskrit word pashanda, from which comes the Hindi word pakhanda, as heresy. This is another example of reverse translation. Pakhand means deceit or hypocrisy, false argumentation. It was applied for that. Now, it's equated with an English word, that is heresy, which is inseparable from a lengthy history of burning numerous heretics and infidels, including some Indian ones in Goa, at the stake, burning them at the stake. Not a Hindu tradition at all. It is important to note now, okay, so now we must note here that both H.H. Wilson and Monier Williams, they were not just lexicographers, that is, people who compiled dictionaries. They were also deeply committed to the Christian project of evangelizing India. After his appointment to the Bowden Chair of Sanskrit at Oxford, Monier Williams wrote a book called Hinduism. And he concluded this book with a statement that thanks to Western education, Hinduism was, I quote, everywhere tottering and ready to fall. And he argued that Christians should take advantage of this and proceed to convert all Hindus, Muslims, and Jains. I don't know how he assumes that you can convert Muslims because Hinduism is tottering and ready to fall, but he does. And he also terms Hinduism a hydra. What is a hydra? A many-headed monstrous serpent. That is one which takes many shapes. All right, now let us come to Indian compilers of dictionaries. 12 years later, in 1890, an Indian scholar, Apte, published the Practical Sanskrit English Dictionary. This is the first such dictionary to be compiled by an Indian, Sanskrit English. He just picks up and reasserts Wilson's and Monier Williams' definition of Nastika as atheist. But he omits the inaccurate reference to disbelief in Puranic legends. Apte writes, Nastika, an atheist, unbeliever, one who did, when I say inaccurate reference to disbelief in Puranic legends, because that was not at all part of the original meaning of Nastika. Now, Apte writes, Nastika, an atheist, unbeliever, one who denies the authority of the Vedas and a future life, or the existence of a supreme ruler or creator of the universe. Now, the definition, one who denies the authority of the Vedas, is somewhat correct for Nastika. But he retains the incorrect translation atheist, even though the English word atheist has obviously nothing to do with the Vedas. And an atheist denial of Christian afterlife follows from the denial of God. While those whom some Hindu scholars called Nastikas, I'm talking about ancient Hindu scholars, such as Buddhists and Jains, they do affirm rebirth. So they do believe in an afterlife of some sort. Apte is the first of the lexicographers to actually cite sources for his definition. The earlier ones didn't. They just gave these definitions. He cites the term Nastiko Vedanindakaha from the Manusmriti, which means that a Nastika is one who denies the authority of the Vedas. Okay, he also mentions Manusmriti 822. The first verse was 211, but he mentions 822 also, which simply states that a land full of Nastikas quickly perishes, but doesn't offer any explanation of the word. Likewise, Apte cites from Magha's 7th century epic Shishupala Vadha, but he does not define the term Nastika there. The term occurs in a list of Shishupala's bad qualities, ahita dana patrapas pastrapashat matro jahita bhirana Nastika. So, Nastika. So, there are many things, but it doesn't say what is Nastika. So, this is not a very useful example. And the Manusmriti example has nothing to do with denying the existence of God. It's not atheist. Apte acknowledges in his preface that he is greatly indebted, I quote, to Monia Williams' The Shabda Sagara Sanskrit English Dictionary 1900. And that dictionary reproduces Wilson's definition verbatim, which I already quoted. So now we see in this whole progression, what do we see? British lexicographers, makers of dictionaries, they first translate the English word atheist into Sanskrit as Nastika, and they sort of cursorily semi-acknowledge that Orthodox Hindus don't say this, they have a different meaning. Then they reverse translate the Sanskrit word Nastika into English as atheist, and then Indian lexicographers follow suit. Sorry, I got that wrong. They first translate the Sanskrit word Nastika into English as atheist, and then the English word as atheist into Sanskrit as Nastika. And then by this time, this is the reverse translation process. Then Indian lexicographers like Apte follow suit, and they cite sources that don't provide any evidence for the new meaning of atheist or Astika, sorry, of Astika. The final stages, now this is the stage in dictionaries. The final stage is when these distortions enter into modern Indian languages. For up to this point, it was Sanskrit. It starts with dictionaries, then it gets into everyday language. Hindi English dictionaries start repeating what the Sanskrit English dictionaries say. So in 1884, Platts published a very famous dictionary, Urdu, Hindi, and English dictionary. He is the first to actually translate the word Nastik accurately. He's a very good lexicographer. But then he goes on to repeat the statements of Sanskrit lexicographers. So I quote, Nastik, saying or one who says Nasti, it is not. Now, this is the first correct definition, and he should have stopped there. And none of the earlier lexicographers had said this. Nasti, saying it is not. But then he goes on, semicolon, denying, comma, atheistical, comma, unbelieving, semicolon, one who denies the authority of the Vedas or who expresses doubts as to the authenticity of the Purans, semicolon, one who denies a future state, an atheist, unbeliever, infidel, Nastik mat, an atheistical opinion, atheism, Nastikata, heterodoxy, especially in reference to the authorities of the Vedas, atheism, unbelief, impiety, unquote. Now, with this whole string of terms, which are not at all the same thing, they're all saying different things, it's no surprise that after this, the Oxford Hindi English Dictionary, which becomes the one most used, pares this down to a very simple equivalence. I quote, Nastik, saying Nasti, it is not, colon, atheistic, which assumes that saying it is not means God is not, but that's not what Nasti means. Two, I'm still quoting, an atheist, an unbeliever. Nastik vad, atheism. Nastikata, atheism, non-belief. Heterodoxy, as in denial of the authority of the Vedas, unquote. Now, significantly, I looked at this dictionary called Glossarium Sanskritum by Bopp in 1847. This is a Sanskrit Latin dictionary, and this is somewhat more accurate. Nastica, qui vitam futuram esse negat, qui Brahmanicae religione non addictus est. Nastico jayate janaha. Now, roughly this translates as one who denies a future life and is not attached to the Brahman's religion. This is not exactly accurate, but somewhat more accurate. He doesn't use the Latin word atheist. Notice, atheist, which atheist means atheist. He doesn't use that to translate Nastika. So maybe this suggests that translating from one classical language to another may produce less distortion than translating from a classical language, Sanskrit, into a vernacular. The effect, like English, now what is the effect of these incorrect translations in dictionaries? It becomes evident in English translations, say, of the Ramayana. In the 1870s, Griffith translated the Valmiki Ramayana and he renders the word Nastikam in some verses in the Rama Jabali dialogue, which are most likely later interpolated verses. They are later verses. He translates Nastikam as cursed infidel. So Rama calls Jabali a cursed infidel, completely wrong translation, infidel. Rao and Murthy's translation changes of the Ramayana changes infidel to atheist. And they remark in their gloss, Rama refutes the atheistic arguments of Jabali. So now they have introduced this Christian term into the Ramayana. After this, reformers and nationalists of all stripes, from Periyar to Savarkar, use the word Nastik and its equivalents like Natika to mean atheist. Now, this is how distortion works in everyday language, from all these people using the word Nastik and its equivalents to mean atheist. Let's take a very well-known example of the use of the word Nastik in translations of Bhagat Singh's essay, Why Am I an Atheist, into modern Indian languages. Predictably, it's translated in Hindi as Main Nastik Kyun Hoon. Now, this is, you can see this in Bhagat Singh's essay. The Western, most scholars agree that Bhagat Singh wrote this essay first in English, and then it was translated. I'll come back to this. In Bhagat Singh's essay, the Western concept of atheism, disbelief in a personal God who creates, supervises, and punishes living beings, sits very uneasily in the same essay alongside Indian philosophical worldviews, which don't require such a God at all. Where did Bhagat Singh get the word atheist? He got it in the context of reverse translation. Everybody was using it in this way by this time. But he also received other concepts from the Arya Samaj and from an Advaita Vedanta thinker who was a contemporary of his. I'll come to that. Although he was only 23 when he was executed, he wisely notes in his essay that when you tear down blind faith, you create a space to construct what he calls a new philosophy and, quote, sometimes some material of the old faith may be used for the purpose of reconstruction, unquote. And then he frankly states, I quote, let me admit at the very outset that I have not been able to study much on this point. I had a great desire to study the Oriental philosophy, but I could not get any chance or opportunity to do the same, unquote. He's using the British term Oriental philosophy, means Indian philosophy. Asian, but mainly Indian philosophy. Bhagat Singh had interesting ideas about how to blend schools of thought and develop what he calls a new philosophy. We can take a parallel example. The early 19th century English poet Percy Shelley, at the age of 18, very young, like Bhagat Singh, he wrote a pamphlet, The Necessity of Atheism, which got him expelled from Oxford University. But having lived on to the advanced age of 29, and he died at 29, and read translations of some Hindu philosophers, he did manage to develop a new pantheistic philosophy, which is very similar to Advaita Vedanta. So from being an atheist, he went to being a pantheist, which means God is in everything. The poet Sadi told him that by reading your work, I feel you are a pantheist, not an atheist. And he said that Shelley seemed very pleased to hear this definition of himself. Now, Bhagat Singh wrote the essay originally in English, and the framework of his argument is primarily drawn from Western thinkers. He says that he studied Bakunin, Marx, Lenin, and Trotsky. The only work that he names is Bakunin's God and State. Now, in this work, God and State, Bakunin puts forward 4 main arguments for atheism that several Western thinkers had put forward already. And Bhagat Singh puts forward the same arguments. What are these arguments? First, an omnipotent and benevolent God would not create an imperfect and unjust world. Second, that a belief is universal doesn't prove that it's correct. Third, that religion exists to delude people, especially oppressed people. Fourth, that science explains the world and humans as being made of matter alone. The difference between Bakunin and Bhagat Singh is that Bakunin engages in detail with Christian theology. Bhagat Singh doesn't do this. He's not very familiar with Christian theology as much, but he does state that Christianity and Islam believe that good people will be rewarded in heaven and bad people punished in hell. And he says this is very poor consolation for injustice. He mentions Sikhism only once in the essay. He says, I quote, I had begun to preserve the unshorn and unclipped long hair, but I could never believe in the mythology and doctrines of Sikhism or any other religion, unquote. He mentions Buddhism and Jainism once each, but he doesn't engage with them. But he does engage with the concept of rebirth, and he calls it a Hindu doctrine. He says, I quote, a God-believing Hindu might be expecting to be reborn as a king. So now in Hinduism, rebirth is a law of actions and their consequences, okay? But Bhagat Singh places it in the Christian framework of a personal God handing out punishments to sinners, which is not what the doctrine is. I quote, well, you Hindus, You say that all the present sufferers belong to the class of sinners of the previous birth. But what is the nature of punishment inflicted by God upon men, even if we suppose them to be offenders? You say he sends them to be born as a cow, a cat, a tree, unquote. Whereas, of course, in the doctrine of rebirth, God may be administering, some God may or may not be administering, because in Buddhism and Jainism, there is no God administering these, but rebirth still exists, be administering these, but it is not as a punishment which God decides to inflict. It is the consequence of actions. Now, Singh asks, with regard to his imminent execution, I quote, "What is the consolation? A God-believing Hindu might be expecting to be reborn as a king. A Muslim or a Christian might dream of the luxuries to be enjoyed in paradise." Unquote. So Bhagat Singh says that he was raised under the influence of his grandfather, who he says, I quote, was an orthodox Arya Samajist, unquote. And he says that every day as a schoolboy, under his grandfather's influence, he recited the Gayatri Mantra. But Singh doesn't mention anywhere the Upanishadic concept of moksha or liberation, or even the Buddhist and Hindu concept of nirvana. He only mentions rebirth and paradise. That's it. The closest that Singh comes to the concept of self-realization or liberation is his citing the book Common Sense by Soham Swami. Soham Swami was an Advaita Vedantist. This is the only Indian source he cites for his idea of atheism. Soham, which was the name taken by the author, his real name was Shyamakanta Bandyopadhyay. Soham means I am that. I am that. Saha plus aham. In his writings, Soham refers to Atman. Now, here you see somebody who is not referring to God, but is referring to self or consciousness. Atman is non-different from every being. It is every being. This is an entirely different concept from God as an omnipotent being creating the world and punishing or rewarding its inhabitants. Upanishadic schools of philosophy are not based on belief or faith, but on premises about the nature of existence. Soham wrote a book called Common Sense, and this is the one that Bhagat Singh cites. It's an exposition of Advaita Vedanta. Singh doesn't mention the term Vedanta, but he refers to Soham Swami and to his students, Soham Swami's students, Niralamba Swami's Advaita Vedanta philosophy. And Bhagat Singh calls this, I quote, only a sort of mystic atheism. So he's saying Advaita Vedanta is a sort of mystic atheism. Again, not quite correct, because many Advaita Vedantas do believe in God. Some do, some don't. The full title of Soham Swami's book is Common Sense or Ek Atma Vijnana. Ek Atma Vijnana means the knowledge of the oneself, Ek Atma. Now, Bhagat Singh doesn't mention the Sanskrit title. In this book, Swami argues that all religions and ideas of a personal creator God are full of inconsistencies. So the goal of life is to realize the divinity in all beings, okay? He wrote both, Soham Swami wrote both in English and in Bengali. In English, he wrote a book-length poem entitled Truth in 1913. This may be the first exposition of Vedanta in English verse by an Indian. In his introduction to the book, Soham Swami's student Swami Nirvikalpa states that Soham Swami has put the abstruse thoughts of Vedanta into English verse, just as ancient sages expressed these thoughts in Sanskrit verse. Nirvikalpa writes, Soham instructs the reader to destroy the irrational belief in an imaginary personal God, to eradicate superstitions, rituals, and cults, since these suppress the growth of truth. In the poem, Soham Swami makes statements that sound very much like Bhagat Singh's statements. The God whom East and West alike acclaim, I found imposture and an empty name. He says, why would such a God allow suffering, unrequited love, injustice, natural disasters, and death? This would not be the case. So he has a section of the poem called Myth of Personal God with Attributes. So he gets rid of these ideas of God, the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim ideas of God, and the Hindus' ideas of God also. He says that philosophers like Kapila, Vyasa, and Patanjali use the term Ishwar not for a personal God, but for a self-realized sage. He also attacks idolatry and so on. He discusses Brahman and Maya, Brahman, and he reaches a standard Advaita Vedanta conclusion. But Brahm thou art, nor portion nor a part, realize a restraining mind that thou art, quoting Tat Tvamasi. And then he provides instructions how to attain self-realization to get into a sublime, what he calls a sublime samadhi state. Okay. The now if we look at today, the meaning of Nastik in Hindi, as well as variants in other languages, has come to be atheist. You find it in Wikipedia. Nastikta is that principle which I'm translating from the Hindi Wikipedia, is that principle which on account of the absence of evidence accepted by everyone does not accept the existence of a God who creates, runs and controls the world. Nasti, na plus asti, is equal to is not, which means God is not. So here it interprets Nasti as meaning God is not. That's not what it means. Gnostic people term the existence of God a lie because of the lack of clear evidence. And then it goes on, Wikipedia goes on, I don't have time to quote all this, but gives a very garbled account of the earlier actual definitions. Actually, with the exception of Nyaya and Vedanta philosophies, all other philosophies of India, including Sankhya, Yoga, Vaisheshika, Buddhism, and Jainism, can be called Gnostic philosophies because none of them accepts God as creator, preserver, and destroyer. Now look at this. Wikipedia is saying that all these ancient schools of philosophy, Sankhya and Yoga, are Nastika, which is ridiculous because this is a sequence of reverse translations, English to Sanskrit, Sanskrit to English, English to Hindi, English and Hindi to Sanskrit. They have changed the ancient classifications of Astika philosophies. These are all Astika philosophies. I'm calling them all Nastika. Okay, so now you may ask, why does this change matter? Okay, words change in every language. They morph, they accumulate new meanings, they change totally their meanings. The reason it matters is that this is not a case of words organically changing meaning. What do I mean by organically changing? Take the word awe, as in awesome or awestruck. Now, that used to mean overcome with reverence and with terror. It's increasingly come to mean excellent or enjoyable, as in awesome coffee. This is a commonly used phrase, and it's also a brand of coffee sold on Amazon. Now, this you can say is an organic change. How does it change? Because as people, the sense of sublimity and of reverence dwindles in the English-speaking world. So the word awe, you don't know anymore what sublimity and reverence means. You go into a cathedral and you don't feel that feeling. And so it just means, oh, this is excellent, this is awesome. So that's an organic change. But when meanings change due to reverse translation, primarily due to colonial lexicographers and scholars, then what is happening here? Non-Western philosophical frameworks are being refitted into the Procrustean bed of Western thought. Now, this shift occurs gradually over a century or so, but it has the most impact on those Indians who may be bilingual, but who read and think primarily in English. And these are the people who are the primary makers of public opinion. Take modern Indian commentators on the Gita and on Hinduism in general, such as Gandhi, Sri Aurobindo, Radhakrishnan. They studied and wrote in English, and they inevitably use reverse translations that had become part of the English language. They incorporate concepts such as theism, atheism, these words, evil, sin, and religion, into their English language analysis of Hindu thought. But I have to say also that these thinkers also drew on their direct knowledge of Indian languages and Hindu scriptures. So they are drawing on two, and popular devotional literature. So their thinking was not, they're using the words, but their thinking is not based on borrowing Christian concepts. Still, they are using English words like sin, evil, religion, atheism, theism, which are not part of Hindu thought. At the popular level, if you look at films or television or everyday language, as I discussed in the case of Wikipedia and Bhagat Singh, the effects of reverse translation, these are people who do not, unlike Gandhi, Sri Aurobindo, and Radhakrishnan, have some acquaintance with, they know Indian languages and Hindu scriptures. The non-scholarly editors of Wikipedia, and Bhagat Singh was very young, did not know the Hindu scriptures. So the effects of reverse translation used by them are more sweeping. Now, it's very significant that the reverse doesn't happen. When philosophical concepts are translated both ways, English concepts don't change their meaning. Now, we know that the word dharma has been given all kinds of wrong translations, reduced to duty, righteousness, virtue, and the entirely different concept of religion. You have to fill out a form and put down your dharma. You have to put Muslim or Christian, which are not dharmas. But the English word religion has not radically changed its meaning. Even though dharma is now an English word and dharma is translated as religion, religion in English hasn't radically changed its meaning. Now, we don't have much time, but let me briefly consider the way the mistranslation of dharma and adharma as good and evil in 20th century of translations of Gita works. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyuttanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamyaham. In 1944, Ishabud and Prabhavananda, they translated Gita for the Vedanta Society. They rendered dharma and adharma in this verse as goodness and evil. And in 4.8, Gita 4.8, they render dharma as righteousness. So they've introduced terms that concept of evil, which is not there in Hinduism. Nikhilananda translates the Gita in the same year, much more accurately. Whenever there is a decline of dharma, O Bharata, and a rise of adharma, I incarnate myself for the protection of the good, for the destruction of the wicked. Notice wicked, not evil. And for the establishment of dharma, I am born in every age. But despite this accurate translations, later translators referred to the earlier terminology. Juan Mascaro in 62, translating the Gita again as righteousness, unrighteousness, and evil for Dushkritam in 4.8. Barbara Stoller Miller, very popular one used in US classrooms, in 1986 translates sacred duty for dharma, chaos for adharma, and men who do evil for Dushkritam. The Gita Press version by unnamed translators, first published in 2002, it says that it's based on Jayalal Goyankar's Hindi translation of the Gita, reverts to righteousness, unrighteousness, and evildoers. Now, what is the problem? Many Hindus are now becoming aware of the effects of this type of reverse translation. So Graham Schweig in 2007, that's the translation I used in class, he follows Nikhilananda in retaining dharma and adharma. Now, what does it matter? It matters because evil is a Christian concept, not a Hindu one. The Latin word malum, that is translated as evil, refers to inherent sinfulness, which is connected to the doctrine of original sin, that we are all born sinful because Adam disobeyed God. And it's closely associated with the devil and his acts. Evil is associated with the devil. How the Germanic Old English word ifel, from which comes the word evil, means bad. At first, it just meant bad or wicked. But over time, it comes to mean something much stronger than that. Evil is a much stronger concept. Dushta, from the root duha, harm, distress, pain, or sorrow, is related to dukha. Something which causes dukha is dushta. The difference between dushta, which just means bad or causing harm, harmful, the difference between that and evil is very common, evident. You just look at a parent, a bilingual parent. You may call a naughty child dusht in Hindi, but you would never call the child evil in English. So the two words are clearly very different. Dusht is not evil. Bad again and evil in English. Bad is not the same as evil. Even within Christianity, the concept of evil is problematic, as Augustine pointed out. He was one of the two main developers of the doctrine of original sin. But Augustine still said that Christianity is a monotheistic religion, and therefore there is no room for the concept of innate evil. Most Christians don't know this, but in his Confessions, Augustine says, he narrates how he had kept searching for an answer to the question of evil, like how could evil come into the world if God is good and God is omnipotent? Finally, he realized there is no such thing as evil because everything that God created is good. I quote, all things that are good, and as to that evil, the origin of which I was seeking for, it is not a substance. You, God, have made all things good, nor are there any substances at all which you have not made. God has made everything, and God made everything good. To you, then, there is no such thing at all as evil, unquote. If it were a substance, it would be good. Okay. Now, he's distinguishing wickedness from evil. And what is wickedness? He says it is a turning away of the will from God. Okay. Now, really, this is irrefutable logic. But most Christians today, one may say, are unaware of this, and they think that evil is real. This is why? Because Christianity is strongly influenced by the binary thinking of good versus evil, God versus devil. Where does that come from? Augustine belonged for 9 years to the Manichaean religion. We have forgotten all about this religion, but it was a dualistic religion founded in Iran by a prophet Mani. From the 3rd to the 7th centuries, that's a long time, it was one of the most widespread religions in the world, and it lingered on until the 14th century. Even though the church declared that Manichaeism was heretical and stamped it out, the idea that the forces of good and evil, God and the devil, are constantly battling one another inside every being and also in the world is a Manichaean idea. This leaves a very strong imprint on Augustine's thinking as well as on Christianity. And how that word evil changes in Latin, you can see in the 1486 book Malleus Maleficarum. It's often translated in English as the Hammer of Witches. This was a book used for witchcraft to punish witches. Several theologians of the Inquisition criticized this book, but it sold more copies in Europe until 1678 than any other book besides the Bible. Now, this book says that witches should be exterminated. Why? Because they are evil, not reformed. Because if you're wicked, you can be reformed. But if you're evil, you cannot be reformed. Before 1400, and this is something we again don't often realize, but in the medieval period, that is before 1400, prosecutions for witchcraft were rare, and witchcraft was viewed as a type of delusion or hallucination. After the publication of this book, Malleus Maleficarum, came the great Renaissance witch hunts in England and America of the 16th and 17th centuries. This book helped to change the meaning of the word malum from harmful acts to evil acts, done mostly by women in association with the devil. Okay, the book argues that the inherently evil nature of women makes them vulnerable to the devil. Now, Hindu philosophies have no room for this concept. Why? Because Hindu philosophies are forms of radical monism, not monotheism, monism. Monism is the principle that all things are ultimately one. So it's even less possible to accommodate the idea of evil in a Hindu framework than in a monotheistic one. Hindu demons or asuras are cousins of the gods. They are not irredeemably damned, as Satan is in Christianity and Islam. What is called dualism or Dvaita in Hindu philosophy is not a dualism of good and evil, but of two forces, Purusha and Prakriti, both of which are good. Demons, Hindu demons, are not the same as devils. In Bhagavad Gita, chapter 16, the analysis of demons, they are nothing but greedy and egotistical tyrants. You'll notice there are almost no poor demons in Hindu narrative. Almost all of them are rich and they are looking for more wealth and power. Bhagavad Gita describes demonic beings, those who try to accumulate wealth by unjust means, anyayena artha. They boast of their wealth and high birth. They think they can control everyone and they plan to kill others, and therefore they are consumed by anxiety. So greedy kings like Duryodhana are termed demons. However, demons have the potential to become good. They're not inherently bad, and they're certainly not damned as devils are in Christianity. Vibhishana is an example. He's from a Devan family, but he's good. Even Duryodhana ends up in the same celestial world as the Pandavas and Krishna. So fortunately, many Hindus, both at the scholarly and popular level, are now becoming more aware of the effects of incorrect translation, but still majority are not aware. And at the popular level also, they are becoming more aware of the different branches of Hindu philosophy. I noticed this on online forums. Earlier, if you asked the question, can a Hindu be an atheist? I noticed other people, I didn't ask this, but I noticed this. It was often indignantly answered in the negative. No, a Hindu cannot be an atheist. Now it receives some more nuanced and more accurate answers. That, the term is not, atheist is not a Hindu term. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for this really great lecture. And it was very detailed, and I hope the audience enjoyed and it was very knowledgeable for them. Now, I would request the audience to please drop your questions in the chat box, and ma'am has access to these questions, so she would reply to your questions. So, one by one, please drop your questions in the chat box. Ma'am, I hope you have the access of the chat box.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
I see it. There are no questions right now.
We'll wait for a few minutes for the audience to type.
Sure.
Ma'am, there's one person who's asking about the books which he may refer for further studies.
Right. There's Andrew Nicholson's book. I'll have to look up the title one moment because I didn't keep footnotes in this paper. If you just wait a minute, I'll get it. I have published this paper in a book. If you actually, it'll be kind of complicated for me to, let me just find that book, name of that book. Yeah, the book is Language, Ideologies, and the Vernacular. I'll paste it here in the chat. So this paper, if you want to read this paper in more detail, this was what I said today was just a short form of the paper. The paper appears in this book. Yeah, it appears in this book, and then there's Andrew Nicholson's book. It's not primarily on this, but he does talk about various things there. One moment.
Ma'am, we have two more questions. I hope you are able to see them.
Yeah, yes, I see. I wish the talk was more about what it runs, the saying that English words given from Indian concepts over a lack of a better words where all these are stuck, there are better or more. Okay, the question is what I already addressed. I wish the talk was more about what is promised than just saying that all English words given for Indian concepts are pretty much wrong. I didn't say all English words. I said certain English words and I gave you the examples. For a lack of a better word is where all these are stuck, and it's not just like there are better or more suitable words. Yes, there are better or more suitable words. Andrew Nicholson translates theist and atheist as affirmer and denier. That's more accurate because it doesn't say what you are affirming or denying. It simply says you are affirming asti and you are denying nasti. That's much better than theist or atheist. There are better words. How does the name change anything? A rose is a rose, said Shakespeare. Actually, he said a rose by any other name. And he didn't say it, Juliet said it. It was a 14-year-old girl and maybe completely wrong. But how does the name change anything? The name changes everything. If you think that a Nastika is an atheist, that means that Hinduism requires belief in one God. Only then can you be an atheist. Hinduism doesn't require belief in one God. So it's changing an actual concept, not a word. A rose is a flower. The rose will remain a rose. Atheist is a concept. It's not a thing out there in the world. It's not like a flower. So atheist is one who doesn't believe in one God. You can be a Hindu and not believe in that God, and not believe in a God with a capital G. All right. So it's very, very important. If the talk hasn't made that clear, there is nothing much I can do. Can yajna be seen as a practice of aesthetic discipline where beauty arises from intention, rhythm, and collective participation? I wasn't, yajna, you mean the Vedic sacrifice, seen as a matter of aesthetic discipline? Yajna is a very, very complex term. There is a physical yajna, which is the actual fire sacrifice, but yajna in the Gita, for example, in another text, is also something else. It's something much more complex. It's a much more complex concept where the Gita says that the whole universe is a yajna, the fire, the rain, every action of yours, offer it as a sacrifice to the universe. So yajna is also every action. Yeah. If reverse translation is this much controversial, then why not Indian historians pointed this out? Many historians have they haven't used the term reverse translation. I made up that term, but many historians were not aware of it because they were using these terms. They were just using the terms evil and atheism and theism and so on. But now, more recently, as I said, several scholars have been pointing it out in different ways that these are wrong translations. And we should use other words, or we should use other terms, or we should explain it. What about dharma, karma, or dushkrita, or a lot more terms? Yes, I think dharma and karma have to be. Karma translates as action. That is fine. That's a correct translation. I didn't say that all English translations are wrong. I gave specific examples. Dharma, I think, should remain dharma. Dharma cannot be translated in one word. You can translate it in a whole paragraph, but when you're using it in the Gita, you're translating, you can't give a whole paragraph every time the word dharma appears. So it's better to just use the word dharma and explain it in a footnote, and then people will use it. As we do with Greek and Latin terms, some terms that are not translatable, we use the original term, right? Thank you. One says, your lecture reminds me how Tantra is perceived within modern Indian society and Western world. Could you please brief about the existence of a concept similar to agnosticism in Hindu philosophy? Yeah, that's a good question. I would say yes, agnosticism is closer to what some Hindu philosophies are doing, like Sankhya or even Buddhism. I'm not saying there is no God. Buddha never addresses the question of God at all. He doesn't say there is no God. Neither does Sankhya say there is no God. They just don't address it at all. So that they don't talk about it. So it means it's not necessary. Agnosticism literally means we don't know. I don't know if there is a God or not. And it's again a Christian term. But if you don't address the question at all, it kind of implies that you're leaving it to people. You want to believe in a God, believe in God, or gods and many gods and goddesses, believe in them. You don't want to, it's not necessary for this philosophy, right? But it's not exactly the same as agnosticism, which means I don't know, literally. But it's close. It's close. So is atheism there in Indian philosophy? No, I don't think that concept of atheism is a concept from, you see, you have to first have a religion that is theistic, monotheistic, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, which asserts there is a God. It starts with that, right? And God said, let there be light, and there was light. It starts with God. So if you say there is no God, then that is atheism. You say there is God, that is theism. The two go together. Hinduism doesn't have this concept of exactly this concept. Hinduism doesn't have that. So is the concept good versus evil not there in Indian context like in Mahabharata? I don't think the word evil is there. Dushta is there. Dushta means badness, wickedness, bad actions. All of that certainly is there. But that is not the same as evil. Evil in Christianity in English is a much more highly developed concept. It means something which cannot be redeemed, which cannot be fixed, which is the absolute implacable opposite of good. The devil, for example, is evil. The devil cannot be redeemed. The devil will remain in hell only. Hinduism doesn't have any such concept of an eternal heaven, eternal hell, and anything that is completely evil and the opposite. No, if you accept good and evil as complete opposites, then you are not monistic. And Hinduism is monistic. Everything is ultimately one. So there is no concept of evil. There is good and bad, yes, but bad is not the same as evil. Could you please, how about using concepts such as domestication and foreignization to solve this problem of mistranslations? And one can use any term one likes. I don't know. What is the difference between philosophy and darshana? Yeah, well, if you look at the literal meanings of the words, philosophy means the love of wisdom. And that's the love of wisdom. And darshana means sight. Since you were talking about books, there's a good book by Diana Eck, a very little book called Darshana, which I think is worth looking at. And Darshana literally means sight, seeing. Aapka darshan hua, which means seeing something, a vision. It's vision. And so Hindu philosophy operates basically on logic and argumentation, but it also requires a moment of vision. There has to be a moment of actually seeing. You have to see. Like when you say, I see, somebody explains something and you say, I see, means I understand. But you take the Gita, Krishna makes a whole argument to Arjuna and makes the whole argument. But ultimately, Arjuna has to see, and that vision of the Vishwarupa, when he sees, that is the moment of darshana. So darshana is the combination of logical argument and of vision. Okay, which is not quite there in philosophy. It may or may not. Philosophy doesn't require, like you say, Hobbes as a philosopher, it doesn't require a moment of vision. And that's the difference, I think. Okay, there was one question before that from Vidya. So is it? Thank you. Could you please outline the projects for liberal and progressive Indian scholars when it comes to reclaiming our narratives? That's too large a question. You'll have to develop your own projects as I'm developing my own. Jainism is traditionally classified as Nastika for rejecting Vedic authority and the creator God, yet it upholds, and I don't think it's about a creator God, it's about for rejecting Vedic authority, yet it upholds an uncompromising ethical universe, etc., governed by karma, self-effort, fearlessness, responsibility, etc. If Bhagat Singh rejected God but affirmed absolute accountability, self-sacrifice without afterlife reward, and liberation through conscious action, can his atheism be meaningfully read as closer to Jain Nastika than to modern materialist atheism? And does this suggest that in Indian philosophy, Nastika may signify not negation, but the highest form of ethical autonomy without God? And I've tried to argue it's not just Jainism, but the other four schools, like Sankhya, for example, four schools of Hindu philosophy also, which don't require a creator God. And over time, originally, these old ancient Hindu scholars did classify Buddhism and Jainism as Nastika, but Buddhism and Jainism themselves, they classified themselves as Astika. Okay, so there was a debate there. And over time, Jainism, at least, since your question is about Jainism, Jainism has become very close to Hinduism, and Hinduism has become very close to Jainism. They are both influenced by each other. And yes, I think that the point you are saying, can Nastika signify not negation, but the highest form of ethical autonomy? You are assuming here that Jainism is Nastika. I don't agree. Jains never called themselves Nastika, nor did Buddhists. That is a negative term used for them by some Hindu scholars, some scholars. But I don't agree with that, and I think they are Astika. Jainism considers itself Astika because it is saying it is. I'm again and again repeating, this is not about God. That was the whole point of my paper. Can Nastika signify not negation, but the highest form of ethical autonomy without God, is your question. God is not in the picture. Nastika is not about God. Nastika is about saying it is or it is not. Jainism is Jainism saying it is, or is Jainism saying it is not? Jainism is positing rebirth and is positing consciousness. So Jainism is not Nastika, Jainism is Astika. What you want to consider Bhagat Singh's views, Bhagat Singh was only 23. See, and I think his views, as all of us from the age of 23, my views have changed drastically. And if you have as William Blake says, a mind, your mind doesn't remain static and it changes. So Bhagat Singh shows some inclination. He says a new philosophy can be developed. He's thinking about developing a new philosophy, and he says, I haven't had time to read Oriental philosophies, that is Indian philosophy too. He hasn't had time to read Jainism or Buddhism or Hinduism or anything. So if he had had time, what he would have evolved into, we can't say, but something would have happened. So you say, in most cases, the meaning of a word is determined by its use in the language. Given the hermeneutic fluidity of language, the words also change their meaning as the context change. Should we focus on the pure primordial meaning of a word, but the evolutionary meaning of a word? I think comparative philosophy or theology is feasible on this paradigm. The point is that the word Nastika and Astika hasn't completely changed its meaning. There are still plenty of Indian speakers, Sanskrit scholars, people who know Hindi well, who know Marathi well, who are still using the word Astika and Nastika in its original meaning. And that meaning still remains, as some of these questions show, that it was supposed to be rejecting Vedic authority, not rejecting God, but rejecting a Vedic authority. Now that, not only rejecting God, but rejecting Vedic authority, that meaning still continues. So that meaning is not just changed completely. I gave you the example of awesome. It has changed largely, not completely. So meaning remains contested, okay, determined by its use in the language. Yes, but it can have more than one use in the language. You say that Wittgenstein says the meaning of a word is determined by its use in the language. But words have more than one meaning. So theist and atheist have one meaning, clearly. But Astika and Nastika have more than one meaning. And there are people arguing, whether it's Nicholson or whether it's translators of the Gita like Graham Schweig and others, who are translating it as affirmer or denier, or they are not translating it as theist or atheist. So it hasn't changed completely. And I am arguing for that contested meaning. I'm arguing that there are some meanings which are more correct and some meanings which are less correct. I don't agree if that is what Wittgenstein is saying, that however incorrect the meaning, we should have to accept it. And it will never be 100% accepted. Atheism is there in Hinduism, right? The Lokayata school propagated. It outrightly denies the existence of personal God. For them to reject the notion of God, there should be a notion of God in Hinduism in the first place. Also, Shankara's Brahmana is God only, right? He even differentiates between higher Brahmana and a lower Brahmana, which apparently is called as Ishvara, which is a personal God again. Okay, so here I would say, yes, Charvaka, Lokayata, whatever you want to call those schools, yes, they are denying the existence of consciousness as well. They are saying that only matter exists. They are denying both God and consciousness and whatever you want to call it, soul, spirit, consciousness. They're denying all of that, Atman, everything. So yes, they are closer to atheism, but that school of thought did not develop. It ended in the ancient world. So yes, you could say that modern materialism is Cartesian material, no, not Cartesian, he believed in God and the soul, but modern materialism is a form, could be seen as similar to Lokayata, Charvaka, etc. So yes, you could use atheism for that. But since that school didn't develop and ended, it's not very useful. You just stated that Hinduism is monistic. What about non-monistic ideas contained in the Vedas, and what about non-monistic schools? I think I would argue that they are all ultimately monistic in one sense. So if you take Dvaita schools are the non-monistic ones, which would say that there is Purusha and Prakriti, there's Shri, Shiva and Shakti, there are two principles, so they are Dvaita. But even they ultimately all say that those two are one. They are two manifestations. They are two manifestations, but Shiva is also Shakti and Shakti is also Shiva. Purusha is also Prakriti. Prakriti is a form of Purusha. They would all say that ultimately. Sankhya is the only one which is a thoroughgoing Dvaita school. Sankhya is the thoroughgoing Dvaita school, but Sankhya it didn't survive. Today, there aren't any practicing, I don't know of any practicing Sankhya philosophers. Why? Because Sankhya was taken up by texts like the Gita, mainly by the Gita, and they took its concepts, combined it with theism, and turned it monistic. So now you said that about Shankara. Shankara differentiates between a higher Brahman and a lower Brahman, which is called as Ishvara, personal God. Yes, Ishvara is a personal God. But those lower Brahman and Sankhya, Shankara is ultimately an Advaita Vedanta philosopher. And yes, there's a lower Brahman and a higher Brahman. You could argue, Sri Aurobindo also argues for this sort of thing. But they are both, again, manifestations. Ultimately, they are not two absolute ultimate set, two principles. I think the only thoroughgoing non-monistic thoroughgoing dualistic schools are Manichaeism, which died in the West. Manichaeism came from Iran but went to the West. That died. And then Sankhya, which also has virtually disappeared. Sankhya was thoroughgoing dualistic in a different sense. The Sankhya is much more complicated, a much more complicated kind of dualism. It's more than a dualism, but it's arguing that every single consciousness, every single individual consciousness, so millions of them, are all absolutely separate. So it's not two, it's many, many, hence the name Sankhya. Now, that view almost nobody, subscribes to now. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for answering these questions. And
Yeah.
I'm really grateful to you that you accepted our invitation. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for joining also. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you. Bye.